So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Turnkey Consulting's latest webinar. Normally, we'd start off with a number of introductory slides for Turnkey Consulting and what we do as a business. I should introduce myself. I'm Simon Persin, Director of Turnkey, based out of the UK. But today isn't really about Turnkey. We're very, very privileged to be joined by Norman Marks today, a very well-respected evangelist, risk professional, mentor, chief audit executive, a man of multiple talents and many, many hats. So we're very, very pleased that Norman can take time out of his very busy schedule to actually help us deliver this webinar for you today. Norman, are you on the line, all ready and raring to go?
I'm here. Good morning. Good morning from California.
Fantastic. No doubt the weather's far better over there than it is here, but we can only make do with what we've got, hey? So, as I mentioned, Norman has worn very many hats in a very distinguished career, from actually doing a proper job within organisations, running audit practices, running Sarbanes-Oxley initiatives, and latterly getting more and more into the risk management space and becoming an evangelist for what helps businesses to run better. He's found lots of time within that to become a distinguished author of multiple different publications, and no doubt you'll have come across some of those works. But certainly when we were constructing this webinar series and inviting Norman to speak, one of his main focus areas was on removing the jargon and then talking about risk management in plain English and the risk and controls in real life. And so from that perspective, that's where the title of this webinar has come from. And so in effect, we've let Norman write the content for this and take it forward. No doubt you'll have seen a lot of blogs on the subject from Norman himself, and I'd just like to reiterate my thanks up front to Norman for joining us on this thing and to hopefully give us the benefits of his wisdom and experience and insight into what makes risk and controls work in the real world rather than just a theoretical version of the truth. So without too much further ado, I'd like to invite Norman to formally take the E stage and dispel any myths that I've concocted about his experience or delights of his professional life. So Norman, over to you.
Well, thank you, and hi everybody. I'm not sure how. Well, thank you, and hi everybody. I'm not sure how much wisdom I'm going to share, but I'll certainly share my views and what troubles me and excites me these days. So, risk and controls in real life. You know, it's sort of timely because we've just had, within the last month or so, an update to the COSO ERM framework. And I was somewhat critical of it because I don't think it's what we need right now. I think that it's better than it was. It got rid of that queue which people could see but they could never explain. But I don't think it's done everything that the practice of the profession needed at this time. We've also got an update going on to the ISO 31000 Global Risk Management Standard, and I think that's also going to be better. And although I have some minor reservations, I think it's going to be something that we should be paying attention to. So what do I mean by risk and controls in real life? It really comes back to the point of view that I have, which is our management and our board, they're not stupid. They've been managing risk. They've been thinking about what might happen always. They just haven't necessarily been doing it in a particularly disciplined way, a structured way. So risk is not something that is new. The consideration of risk, perhaps it's simply being talked about more, and frankly, I'm not sure that discussion is always constructive and helping us do this right. So let me walk you through some of what I mean by this. So risk management, we have our own language, and identify, assess, manage, treat. Treating a risk. Okay. Review, report, but is that really what it's about? We treat risk as if it's something that we need to handle, instead of recognizing that anybody in life, let alone in business, has to take risks to survive. I like to talk about the fact that every time we breathe, we're taking a risk. We're breathing into our body foreign objects, potentially diseases and infection. But certainly breathing, taking that risk, is better than the alternative. And in our business, whether you're deciding which vendor to select or which project to go forward, whether to continue in light of potential cyber security issues, to roll out some new technology, you have to take risk, but it's all about, are you doing that in an intelligent and informed fashion? Okay? It's not about risk management as if it's something evil. It's about knowing which risks we need to take and which risks we need to do something about. And so when we talk to management about all the bad things, there's a risk here, if there's a strong likelihood that they're not going to be willing to listen to us and take our advice, because all they see us doing is talking about the downside, and they're focused on success. So just think about leaving home. There you are, you're thinking about leaving home, and as you near the door, somebody pops out in front of you and says, oh, wait a minute, I'm your risk officer. You should know that if you leave home, there's a likelihood that you could get knocked down by a runaway bicycle or by a car. You could get hit by falling objects from work that's going on outside. There's all kinds of bad things that could happen, and that's what the typical risk officer does, is just gives you a list of all the things that might go wrong. But in fact, you know you need to go to work. You know you need to go pick up your children. You know you need to be at a particular place, perhaps to meet your spouse or your loved one. There's reasons to go out there. So how do you decide? Well, you are going to think about all the potential consequences, both the good and the bad, and then make an informed and intelligent decision about whether you go outside or you stay in, realizing that if you stay in, you're running different risks. So we have to make a decision. We have to make a decision, and decisions are basically all the time. We're making them, others are making them, that affect us. And in fact, if you think about an organization, decisions are being made that could affect the achievement of objectives, the success of the organization, all across the extended enterprise, at all different levels. If you just get a list of risks, and every time you meet your risk practitioner, your risk officer, all they do is give you a list of risks, how does that help you when you're focused on an objective, focused on delivering value, focused on hitting some kind of target, getting something done, making some money? Think about it, okay? Would this over time just lead you to say, okay, I know, go away, I know what I'm doing? And in fact, that's a lot of times what our executives say. They don't want to listen to us because they say, yes, I understand all of this, but I need to do something else. There's this disconnect between the risk officer and their language and the business person who's trying to get something done and their language. They're talking about success. They're talking about performance. They're talking about achieving objectives. They're talking about hitting their target. And we're talking about risk appetite and tolerance and capacity and all this other stuff. And it's like, and treating risk, and it's like, is it not surprising that we don't get their attention? Here they are, trying to figure out which path forward? Every single option here, every single scenario that they could imagine has possible consequences, good and bad. And somehow they need to figure out which is the one that's most likely to get them where they want to be on time, successfully, safe, and all the rest of it. Okay, and the downside is just one side of the equation. And in fact, there's multiple things that could happen going forward. Deloitte did this study. Look at this. Only 13% of C-level respondents believe that risk management is helping them get their job done. And they see their job as developing and then executing on business strategies. 13%. That's pretty awful. And perhaps it's because we focus so much on the downside, and they're focused on getting things done. They're not ignorant of the things that could go wrong. They've always thought about that.
Hi, Norman. Sorry to interrupt you here. It's Simon here from Turnkey. Just a quick point. I'm not sure whether it's the same for all the participants, but I'm not sure that the slides are actually flicking over.
Oh. All right, what's going on here? Technical difficulty there. It's one of the one of the potential things that could happen when you do a webinar. So what I was saying was that if only 13% believe that we are helping them do their job, why should they give us time? Why should they give us resources? Why should they give us their attention? Now, back in 2011, Mark Beasley and his people at North Carolina State and the ERM Initiative did a study. They talked to its practitioners mostly and asked them about the maturity of their risk management program. 3.4% said that it was mature. That's not very good. The good news is it's up by 50%. They issued an updated study this year based upon surveys that they sent out in 2016, and it's gone from 3.4 to 5%. There's a problem with the practice that is not being embraced. It's seen as a compliance activity rather than something that is helping the executives and the leadership of the organization get the job done and succeed. For me, it's about decisions. Everything that gets done is through decisions, and every decision creates or modifies what we would call risk, changes the path that we're on. This is where we decide whether or not to take a risk. And this is when we consider all the different potential consequences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and just make a decision. What are we going to do? Are we going to go ahead with this project? Are we going to hire this individual or that individual? Are we going to set up pricing on this scale or that scale? Should we offer this major customer a deal even though it could threaten cash flow or whatever? We have to make these decisions. This is how people run their business. It's about taking risks, and some people talk about embracing risk. Well, I'm not sure. I'm not going to say I'm going to go that far and talk to executives about embracing risks, but certainly there are times when, in fact, we're always taking risks. It's just a matter of, are they the right risks to be taking? And if we're making a decision as to whether to leave home, we're going to be looking at what might happen that's bad, the top part, and we're also looking at the things at the bottom. Now, there are some risk practitioners I speak to and people who responded on my blog saying, well, you know, I can provide tools and methodology to put some kind of estimation and clarity around all the things that might go wrong. But I'm not going to do that for the things at the bottom because somebody else does that. Well, if I'm an executive and I'm trying to make a decision, and I've got some nice quantifiable models and all the rest of that information about the bad stuff, and I've just got my gut feeling or the opinion, feedback I'm getting from the head of sales on the good side, how good is my decision? Why am I not looking at all the things that might happen and applying as best I can the same kind of discipline to assess both sides so that then I can decide which side is better, is that acceptable, am I going to go forward, what am I going to do? So I like to think as risk being, and the management of risk is thinking about all the things that might happen and doing that in a disciplined and systematic way so that we can make a good decision. We are in a certain place. There's a place we need to go. Between where we are and where we want to be, a lot of things might happen. And we think about that when we're going to work, when we're going to a meeting, when we're deciding whether to dial into a webinar, whether we're thinking of using Turnkey for help with this solution. We're thinking about all of these things. So why isn't that, to me, that's risk management. COSO, this is actually out of the 2004 framework. Enterprise risk management helps you get where you want to go. Helps you get where you want to go. It's focused on achieving that objective. Now, I'll tell you that the 2017 version has somewhat lost that idea that it's all about achieving objectives. They say it's sort of in there, but it's not where it's not necessarily helping us get where we need to go. We need to be doing more than review a list of risks. We need to be helping the executives figure out, are they likely to get where they want to be, considering all the things that might happen? Because it's about achieving objectives. And even in 2004, they were talking about risk-taking and decision-making. The 2009 version of the ISO 31000 standard was adopted, as you know, all around the world, globally. And in Ireland, they came out with this piece of guidance, which is pretty good. It said, purpose of managing risk is to increase the likelihood of achieving of its objectives. Not only managing threats and harms, but taking advantage of the good things that might happen. Because consequences can be good or bad. And in fact, you usually have combinations. Some good and some bad will flow from any decision or action or even an event that happens. It's both good and bad. And we're in the business of making decisions and weighing all the potential consequences. So, for example, if I'm in Tennessee and I need to drive to Knoxville, there are certain things I'm going to do before I leave. I'm going to make sure that the car has enough. In the States, it'd be gasoline. Over the UK, it'd be petrol. But I'm still going to make sure that the car is serviced, it's fueled up. I've got an idea of how I'm going to get there. Perhaps I make sure that from the weather forecast, from traffic conditions projected, that there's no expected, I'm not going to anticipate any delays along the route. So there's some things I'm going to do. I'm going to perhaps look at Google Maps and see how long it's going to take typically to get there. Make sure I leave in plenty of time. Set my alarm clock. Get my spouse alerted so she'll take care, or he'll take care of the kids. So there's certain things I'm going to do ahead of time which will enable me to reach my objective. Because that's what it's all about. It's not going to stop there, and I'll come back to that. Because as we're driving, even as we're driving, things may happen that we hadn't anticipated. And so this is one of the reasons why risk management is more than a periodic list of risks, because risks don't wait until you're looking to change. We live in a very turbulent and dynamic environment, what McKinsey calls pervasive, ongoing uncertainty. And we need to be very much aware of what's going on ahead. Your traditional risk manager too often just looks in the rearview mirror rather than trying to anticipate what might be around that corner. Traditional risk manager will also perhaps think about the fact they can see a moose on the side of the road parallel with a car. And they say, oh, this is massive. It's a 350-pound moose. It could jump out in front of the car and cause a lot of damage. And by the way, that will stop you from getting to Knoxville on time. Well, the fact is we're going down this road at 60, 70 miles an hour, maybe 55 in the UK. And the likelihood that that moose is going to be able to jump in front of the car is level with us now. It's not going to be able to jump in front of the car. So we've got to be looking at risk within the context of will it affect our getting where we need to be. And sometimes we don't do that. We don't focus too often on the road ahead. Instead, we look at a list of risks. And to me, that's like driving down this road and only looking through the windscreen in front of us every 15, 20 minutes. Felix Kloman is a risk management guru that's been around for decades. And I like what he has to say here. It helps you pierce the fog of uncertainty. You can't really, with any certainty and any clarity, know what's going to be down that road, what's going to happen, what these vehicles are going to be doing, whether there's cars coming down the other way, whether there's some kind of a traffic build-up where you're going to have to stop in a hurry. And if we can find ways to get more clarity and more visibility, increase the likelihood that we can anticipate what's happening, we're going to enable our decision makers to make better decisions and achieve success. So coming back to this map, we're on our way to Knoxville. And we get to that point there, just south of Andersonville, where you see the number 71, and we have to make a decision. Are we going to turn right as planned and go down the Interstate 75, or are we going to continue on 441, which may be a little bit slower? Well, we need information to be able to make that decision. We need information about, are there accidents? Is there clogged traffic on 75, such that it's now not a good place to go? So hopefully we're listening to the radio, listening to the weather forecast and the traffic news. We're watching the signals on the car as to whether there's any pending problems coming up in terms of fuel, in terms of water and heat, anything else, any noises coming that we may have to stop along the way. And all the way down, let's say we continue down and we go down onto the freeway. Let's say we get stopped, or not stopped, but we're slowed down significantly by a number of very heavy vehicles trolling along at just 35 miles an hour down the freeway. So you've got to decide, am I going to pass this vehicle or not? Is it safe to do so? If I stay behind, what's going to happen? I could be safer, perhaps, but I'll be late getting to my meeting. On the other hand, if I overtake, I'm increasing the risk of an accident. So you're going to decide at what point it becomes worthwhile taking that slight risk. Hopefully you've limited the risk by looking and paying attention to the traffic that's coming in the passing lane before you pull out to pass it. And all the way down here, you're making this kind of decision. And let's say you get down to the ring road around Knoxville 20 minutes early. Now you have to make another decision. What are you going to do with that extra 20 minutes that you've got? Are you going to go and stop at your favorite coffee shop so you can pull up your presentation and get better prepared? Or are you going to go simply straight to the meeting and be absolutely 100% certain you're there safely and prepared for the meeting. Choices to make, decisions that you have to take, risks that you have to take or decide not to take in order to be successful. Risk management is a continuing activity. It's all about managing your life, it's about managing your business, it's about managing. Setting the right objectives. If you don't set the right objectives to start with, well, you're going to achieve the wrong result. You're going to achieve a result that perhaps is not very good. I ran into providing a little bit of consulting support to a company up in northeast of the United States, and they told me about the situation where the company was really struggling, and the CEO and his executive team would figure out what they could do, the best path forward, what was achievable through new products, through perhaps some acquisitions, and then go to the board. And the board said, that's not good enough. We need you, if we're going to keep the share price up, we're going to satisfy the investors, we need a 15-20% increase on these objectives. Well, the executive team knew that was not possible, but they have been set these objectives by the organization. As a result, they started taking increasingly high level of risks, which frankly had very little chance of success. Making acquisitions, building new products, which frankly were out of date before they even hit the market. So they just slipped further and further into trouble, all because they set the wrong objectives. The strategy setting process has to consider, the objective setting process has to consider what might happen, and also consider what is the possibility of getting the wrong objective. Am I involving the right people? Do I have good information? Do I understand what my competitors are doing? Do I understand what might be happening with regulation? Because otherwise, I might set the wrong objective. COSO taught the 2017 version talks about each option for strategy and what might happen, but it doesn't talk about the fact that perhaps you don't have good information to use as a basis for selecting among the different options. So they're missing something there. But from a risk management point of view, from a running the organization point of view, we need to make sure we're setting the right objectives, and then as we execute on them, making intelligent decisions. Which path are we going to take? Which option should the procurement manager, or the strategy manager, or the pricing manager select among all the different ones? Because there's good and bad. If you set the price higher, you might drive revenue higher. On the other hand, you might turn customers away and therefore drive revenue lower. Both are possibilities. It's about taking the right risk. And are we actually helping people to take the right risk? Because if we're not, in our mind, trying to help them take the right risk, and if we're not in their mind helping them, what's the point? We're there only to satisfy a regulatory or governmental code requirement, rather than actually contributing to the success of the organization. So, if we can help drive better decisions, not only protect value, but also help people seize opportunities, because they understand the downside as well as understanding the upside, and they can make an intelligent weighing of the consequences to decide what to do, then we're helping. Also, especially in this day of turbulent dynamics, whether it be society, whether it be the economy, whether it be technology, a lot of things are happening all the time. And our organization needs to be able to respond appropriately and at speed to these changes. If we don't have a mechanism, if we don't have the the process, the methodology, the resources dedicated to looking at what might happen, we're not going to be prepared for that. We're not going to be able to respond and take advantage of situations like that. And if we fail to lead and instead follow, what happens to our market leadership? What happens to our connection with customers? I like what EY, Ernst & Young, had to say a couple of years ago. Because people talk about integrating risk and the consideration of risk into decisions. It's much more than that. It's always been part of decision making, thinking about what you do. So when EY talk about it being part of the rhythm of the business, that's smart. A friend of mine, Grant Purdy, who's one of the grandfathers of risk management standards out of Australia, started talking about the fact that some of the drive right now has been actually to remove risk management from being integrated, making it separate, a separate activity there to, if you like, ride herd and police the cowboys in management. Well, that's a problem. What we've got to do is we've got to help those, quote, cowboys make better decisions, not take part of the decision-making process away from them. We've got to help people be successful. And it's got to be part of, it's got to continue to be part of how they make decisions. But it's got to be, and this is where we help, more informed, perhaps better disciplined, thinking things through. When somebody, whether it be your child, one of your team members, makes a mistake, what do you normally say? You normally say, what were you thinking? And then perhaps you say, you weren't thinking. Well, that's really what we're talking about here. It's thinking. Thinking about what might happen if we did this. What might happen if we did that. Now let's use some discipline to consider all those particular scenarios and consequences, and then make the decision that's going to result in the consequences we would like to see. So let's see if we can get rid of this R word. When we talk about risk, it tends to have a negative perception. It's not only that it's seen as something that could go wrong, but the executives see it as something that's going to inhibit success, something that's going to slow them down, is going to get in the way of them running the business. So if we can have a conversation with executives that does not use what I call the techno-babble of our practice, whether that be security, risk management, audit, safety, whatever, if we can talk in their language, we're going to be much more likely to connect with them, break down that disconnect, in other words, and actually have a constructive conversation. So how about using this word, anticipate, and what might happen? Can we, in fact, anticipate what might happen if we did this, or if we did that, or if we did nothing? Now let's analyze the possibilities. Let's think through what might happen. Is there, in fact, a problem? Is this okay or not? If it's not, what are we going to do about it? What are the options? Which is the best option? Let's take each one of those options and again think through, well, if we did this one, what could happen? Using maybe some scenario analysis, but what might happen under this option or that option? And then which one's the best? Make a decision, act, actually execute, which sometimes people realize that there's a difference between decide and act. And then obviously we're going to have some kind of continuous reviewing, monitor, learn, act, almost like the agile loop. So as we continue to learn more, we can keep revisiting it and adapting, becoming more agile. If we talk this way, instead of your typical ISO process or COSO language, I think you're going to connect, because this is business language. This is the language that people will understand. Because everybody is managing risk every day across the extended enterprise. But every so often, it is worthwhile to take stock of those more significant, typically external factors and issues and potential events that could affect us and our strategy. Not just what some people call strategic, but this breaking things down between strategic and operational can get in the way of you thinking about what might happen. If your machines break down, that can affect your achievement of strategy. It's not just an operational risk. It can affect the achievement of your objectives. So every so often it's worthwhile taking stock, but think about how all these different things can affect your success, affect the delivery of value, affect the achievement of each of your objectives. All right. Now, I've thrown a lot of stuff at you there in terms of, can we break down that disconnect? Can we stop treating risk management as something new and separate, and it needs a separate discipline, it needs to have all of this bureaucracy and reporting separately to the board, and let's focus on instead how the company, how the organization actually works. Now, can we make it more likely to succeed by helping people see and anticipate what might happen? Can we challenge, for example, the CFO when he comes to the organization and an executive leadership team and says, here's my projection for revenue for the next quarter? Can you say, well, what's your level of confidence in that? What are the assumptions? How likely are these assumptions to go forward? What can we do to increase the likelihood of those actually coming through? What can we do, in fact, to increase the possibility of going over this projection? What can we do to further limit the downside? And this kind of constructive conversation in plain English, I think, is going to be perceived by management as helping them succeed, and therefore valued, therefore worth spending some money and resources and their precious time and attention to it. Now, internal controls. There are some parts of Europe where they seem to want to impose internal controls on a process. My message is, we've always had internal controls. We just haven't necessarily talked about them as being controls. Okay, COSO, the 2013 update of the internal control framework, says it provides reasonable assurance regarding achievements. Why? Because it takes the risks to those objectives and it has controls to address those risks. Okay, we'll work through that language. But the point here is that you're always going to have some acceptable level of risk, a risk you're willing to take. And how do you know it stays at that level? Well, there are things you do to make sure that the risk of breathing is good. So, for example, if you're going swimming, perhaps you take some gear, scuba gear, or something else to help you breathe. If the air is bad, as it was 10 days ago here in Northern California, because of the pollution from the fires about 100 miles north of here, which is really bad, a lot of people are wearing masks. These are controls. These are controls to help address those risks. And this is a simple way I have of talking about what controls are. Controls help you make sure things happen the way you want them to happen. Whether it be checking your children's homework, checking the gas tank, the petrol tank is full before you leave. These are things you do, or others do, to to give you some level of assurance that things will work out the way you want them to. It also will tell you when things are not happening. So, for example, some kind of alarm that goes off when your gas tank is almost empty, or you've got a puncture in one of your tires. Internal controls also, from an executive point of view, you're trying to achieve success. You are, in fact, relying upon certain things happening, the people, the process, the systems of the organization. And so when people like internal audit come along and assess the system of internal controls, hopefully they're doing that within the context of what you're trying to get done and the risks to them. And they'd be able to tell you that, yes, you can rely upon this to actually work the way in which you want it to ensure things happen the way you want to, and so on. So that if you're relying upon people setting prices and making certain decisions, these controls are making sure that the right people are involved, that they're looking at what might happen, they're getting reliable information, and so on. Controls help you succeed. And again, it's this continuing disconnect that we need to be thinking about helping people succeed. Yes, we do want to point out the possibility of failure, but if we're trying to make things happen right, set the right price, hire the right people, select the right contractor, these are things that controls help us with. It can be manual, automated, could be a combination. Technology is starting to insert itself in here in very interesting ways. Not only through things like big data and analytics that will detect when things are not going right, but you've actually got things like robots and IBM Watson and other things which are changing the whole nature of controls going forward, which is really interesting. And I think that it also gives us opportunities to improve controls and the management of risk, achievements of success through enhancing our systems, but also then enhancing our ability to detect when something doesn't go the way in which it should. And especially when it comes to cyber, a particular concern of mine, I don't think enough people are spending enough time and attention to detect what is going wrong. But that's possibly for another time. But technology is demonstrably changing so much. And we really need to be understanding what is happening and what could be happening and what should be happening with our organization that could affect not only controls, but risks and the management of risks, monitoring of what's going on, even knowing what our path is and where we are on the path to success. Certain controls are being automated, and some of these new tech tools, and I used to work years ago for SAP, and I know that some of the technology and some of the applications will actually help you to automate controls. They'll also help you understand a little bit better when some of the controls are failing. Also help you know when some of the activities, the decisions, are leading to consequences that you don't want. Communicate risk levels. I ran into one individual that was running the information security function for his company, and on his tablet he had real-time access and to the security levels through dashboards and warnings, so he could, wherever he was in the world, whatever he was doing, he could know immediately when some kind of warning flag went off that something was going on that he didn't want to go on. Monitor the status of the actions that are being taken. Frankly, this is another thing that management fails to understand. If they don't understand that corrective action is not being taken, they don't understand that risk remains open. And if it's worth doing, if it's worth making a fix because of the level of risk, then it's worth making that risk disappear now. Manage your controls, know what the population is, know how they're changing, know whether they've been assessed. So you have confidence that you can run the business properly and everything is working the way in which it should. Certainly, you can improve the efficiency of all of your assurance functions, risk management, internal audit, as well as also compliance, information security, and so on. And I think that in the same way as the business is using technology, some of these assurance functions really should be looking to technology to help them run their part of the business better. Because it's all about the speed of business, the speed of risk, which is so dynamic and changing all the time. And how can we help people be successful with all of this going on? And that should be our focus, whether you're in risk management, whether you're in information security, whether you're in internal audit, whatever function you're in. Even if you say, I'm in a support function, well, you're supporting the business succeed. So how can we do that? Our job is not to slow them down to the point where they become so risk averse they fail. It's not always easy. And so I like to show this in all my presentations with all credit back to Mercedes-Benz. Because sometimes we have to take chances, because if we don't take the chance, something is going to happen and it's going to bite us where we don't want to be bitten. We have to be willing to move forward. We have to be willing to change our ideas. We have to be willing to embrace new concepts and shift our focus from preventing harm to enabling success. So I'm going to turn it back. By the way, those are 5 of my 6 books there on the top there. So Simon, do we have any comments or questions that came through in the chat? And please, everybody, please share your thoughts.
Well, so first of all, thank you very, very much, Norman, for taking us through that. I'm sure there's given all of the attendees a lot of food for thought, certainly myself included. I didn't see any questions coming up on the chat bar initially as we were going through the presentation itself, but there were I suppose a couple of thoughts from me really, just to sort of summarise and probe a little bit further. But I mean, certainly what you've spoken about is almost like a light bulb moment where people switch from risk averse to sort of embracing risk. And I was wondering whether or not you've actually seen that kind of light bulb moment in action where people's attitudes have changed, and what that sort of means from a business point of view.
Oh, that's such a good question. Thank you, Simon. So yeah, when I first started writing about this, late last year, perhaps, somebody came back to me and said, you know, I'm Chief Risk Officer, and I was having problem talking to the executives. I just changed the name of my department and stopped talking about risk management and started talking about how can we address the possibility of success. And now people are opening up their doors and they're inviting me in, and we're having constructive conversations about the business, constructive conversations about what it's going to take to get this project successful, to achieve these earnings targets and so on. And it's really working. So yeah, I mean, one of the things also that I've recommended is that the management reporting should shift from a list of risks to helping people understand what's the likelihood of each objective. Take each objective that you have. So now, considering all the things that might happen, all the things in your risk register, risk profile, whatever you want to call it, what's the likelihood of achieving that? Now, is that good? Is that bad? And in fact, okay, let's say it's 75%. What's going to happen to the other 25%? What are we going to do with that? And I think that's a much more constructive form of risk reporting than simply a list of risks, which is somewhat out of context. It's not clearly relevant to the executives who say, well, I've got a business to run. So yeah, I'm having a lot of people come back to me and say that this does work.
Fantastic. We've got a question here from Alex saying, what kind of decision should risk management be integrated first of all? So, Alex, obviously, correct me if I'm wrong, but to paraphrase, I think what is asking there is to say, what are the sort of the key areas that risk management should be integrated with in a business context? What do you see as the key areas that benefit from both that risk and opportunity management as part of a traditional enterprise machine?
So thank you, Alex, for the question. So let's recognize first of all that every decision, whoever's making that decision is in a position to weigh the potential consequences of the decision, look at the different options, and then decide what to do. So they are already managing risk. Now, should the risk management function be in there helping? Well, it depends on how critical that is and where the risk officer needs to be spending their time. So let me give you a story from SAP. Back in 2008, when the Great Recession hit, as you can imagine, SAP being the vendor of major software, started being concerned that its customers were not going to be buying and investing in SAP software. So they decided that the company as a whole needed to cut headcount. But they did it in a more intelligent fashion than many. They didn't take an across-the-board head cut. They said, where can we afford to cut? And the CFO came to the senior vice president running the risk management function and said, how can you help? And she said, well, we have a policy that says every potential customer contract, every customer deal over, I don't know what it was, $10 million, needs to have a risk officer there to help facilitate the discussion of what might happen, and considering all the things that could be flowing in terms of this deal, whether it's going to be good for credit, cash flow, implementation capability, and all the rest of it. So what we could do is we could change it from 10 million, and I need so many people to support a 10 million level, to 20 million. That way, we're involved less frequently, and so I can let go or not fill vacancies that I have to support that level. And the head of sales for the United States, North America actually, came back and said, no. I don't want you increasing it from 10 to 20. I want you to drop it from 10 to 5. Because these decisions that we're making are so critical that I need to have the discipline that your risk officer is going to bring to it. And so instead of going from 10 to 20, they went from 10 to 5. They didn't cut the head count. They managed to keep the same head count and just become more efficient somehow. And within a year or so, the CEO of North America was bragging to everybody about how valuable this had been because they had made better decisions. So I think that we need to, like I said, coming back, every decision all the time is in fact a risk management decision, but they may not think about it as that. We as risk practitioners need to be looking to see where we can help them the most, and that means perhaps involving ourselves where the information perhaps is a little bit frail, maybe we've got less experienced decision makers who need some help framing and going through the process. So it's a judgment call. But so I don't think there's an automatic, always going to be here is always going to be there. But I think that we need to be looking at where can we help the most. Thanks, Alex.
Fantastic. That actually links in very nicely with the next question that we've received. So the question was saying, if the move should be away from a mechanistic risk approach, then should we focus much more on a risk-aware culture and building risk capabilities at the coalface? And for me, that effectively just led straight on from what you were saying, that by having more risk professionals front of mind and involved in business operations, that's exactly what I think you were recommending. And certainly from a consultancy perspective, we find that changing the hearts and minds and changing the culture is by far the more difficult approach than perhaps smashing in a piece of technology that would automate something. I just wondered what you felt on that particular statement about the amendment of a mechanized risk approach and moving more towards a risk-aware culture.
So if the mechanized risk approach considers all the potential consequences, the good and the bad, then that's fine. That's good. Unfortunately, too often it only looks at the bad, the harms, and doesn't consider the upside and whether it's actually worthwhile and necessary to do that. For example, if I've got a friend walking down, let's say I've got my spouse walking down the other side of the street, I see her. She waves me over or waves at me, and I have decided I'm not going to cross the street. Well, it's a busy street, so I just signal that I'm going to go down to the traffic lights and cross over there. Then she falls down all of a sudden and screams. Now, my desire to get over there is going to change potentially my decision and how I'm going to get to her, right? But the risk has not necessarily changed. It's just my, if you like, appetite or desire, attitude towards taking that risk has changed. The problem with when people talk about risk awareness, risk capacity, is again, they're focused solely on the negative. And if we become too risk averse, we slow down the business, we fail to take opportunities, and eventually we will slip in the market. Risk aware to me means keeping all of our eyes, ears, and thoughts open to all the things that might happen, right? And if we do that, if we are willing to anticipate all the things that might happen and then make an intelligent decision, to me that's better. If we just talk about risk aware and risk culture, people tend to be focused on, well, let's make sure people don't take too much risk. Well, sometimes you need to take risk. Let's just leave it like that, because I know we're running out of time here, Simon. Are you there?
Hi. Yes, Norman. So I was just going to say exactly that. We've got one final question, and good luck to you to answer this succinctly. But for organizations with a less mature risk outlook, how do you persuade them that it's not just an IT problem and responsibility?
I think it first of all starts with, you're talking about IT here. We're talking about the people in IT understanding the reality of running the business, and that it's not always about avoiding risk. Sometimes you have to deploy new technology in order to survive in the marketplace, even though the risk is higher than your risk professionals might be willing to take. So I think it starts with looking in the mirror and say, do you understand their perspective? And then shift the conversation to making sure you fully understand, and then explaining how issues and potential hazards, vulnerabilities and threats from a cyber perspective or from a systems development and maintenance perspective could affect the business. How will it affect service to our customers, talking to our vendors and supply chain, protecting not only information, critical information, but our reputation. And how much will it cost to bring it up to a different level? And is that level still so much better that it's worth spending the money? So I think we have to look in the mirror first and decide, are we going to be business people first with responsibility for IT? And then have a conversation with the executives that helps them understand the risk that they are taking by going ahead. And if they understand that level of risk, if they're willing to take that level of risk with full knowledge, that's their job. That's their job. They were put in there to make those decisions. Our job is to help them to make that decision with their eyes wide open. And And then we have to go along with it and do what we can to keep that risk as manageable a level as we can. And certainly be monitoring it to make sure that we can react as soon as something inappropriate happens. Hopefully that answers it, Simon.
Very good. Fantastic. So I think that's all of the questions we've really got time for, but no doubt if you have any others, please feel free to direct them to the key insights at turnkeyconsulting.com, and we'll certainly take those offline and see whether we can find some sort of answer for you. All that remains for me to say is a very great thank you to Norman once again. You did manage to impart your wisdom as well as your insights and your expertise, so congratulations for that. Thank you once again, and no doubt we'll speak soon.
Thank you, Simon. And thank you, everybody.
Brilliant stuff. Okay, guys, thank you very much for your time, and no doubt we'll see you on a future webinar.